London, 1933. The bells of St. Margaret's toll in solemn rhythm, though no joy follows. The guests murmur in shocked disarray. At the altar stands a groom, ashen, trembling, abandoned. For the bride, Lady Evelyn Marchmont, has vanished. All that remains is a trail of crushed rose petals and the faint shimmer of her sapphire necklace, broken and discarded near the vestry. In the crowd, a small man with a waxed moustache leans on his cane, his eyes narrowing with quiet calculation. Hercule Poirot has seen many crimes, but a vanishing bride on her wedding day? Mon Dieu, this is no accident. This is crime, most cruel. The Vanishing Bride. The bells of St. Margaret's on Grosvenor Square rang out in jubilant tones, each peal spilling into the crisp spring morning. Sunlight streamed through the stained-glass windows of the venerable church, casting shafts of crimson and sapphire upon the aisle that had been carefully strewn with rose petals. It should have been a morning of joy, of solemn vows and radiant beginnings. Society's finest had gathered, their silks and satins rustling as they shifted on the polished wooden pews. The air was thick with the mingling perfumes of lilac, rosewater, and expensive cologne. Every head turned expectantly toward the heavy oak doors through which the bride would soon pass. Yet, for all its splendor, something in the air was wrong. A hush had fallen, heavy and uncomfortable. The organist, who had begun the opening chords of Mendelssohn's Wedding March, faltered, his fingers stilling upon the ivory keys, as whispers ran like a ripple across the congregation. The bride had not entered. At the altar stood Lord Henry Marchmont, the groom, a man in his middle 30s of stern bearing and hawkish features. His black hair, slicked back with pomade, glistened beneath the shafts of light. But his face was pale, rigid, the mask of a man caught between rage and despair. He adjusted the cuffs of his morning coat for the 4th time, his knuckles blanching as his fists clenched. Beside him, his best man, a nervous young cousin, leaned in with a whisper, "She must have been delayed, Henry. Perhaps her veil, or the carriage." Silence! Charming smile. That she had finally chosen Lord Henry Marchmont, a man of strict demeanour and formidable family connections, had raised more than a few eyebrows. Yet whatever private doubts society whispered behind lace fans and cigars, all had gathered this morning for the spectacle of their union. The wedding was to be a marriage not merely of individuals, but of fortunes, estates, and social standing. And yet the bride did not appear. It was at this moment of rising unease that a small, fastidious man in a perfectly tailored grey suit adjusted his gloves and leaned ever so slightly upon his cane. His moustache, most carefully waxed and resplendent, twitched with interest. Hercule Poirot, late of the Belgian police and now the most celebrated private detective in Europe, had not intended to involve himself in society gossip. He was merely a guest, invited through the acquaintance of Lady Evelyn's late father, whose friendship he had once enjoyed. Poirot had attended out of courtesy, expecting nothing more than polite conversation and perhaps a fine luncheon. But now his sharp, bird-like eyes noted the tremor in Lord Henry's jaw, the nervous glances exchanged among the bridesmaids, the way the vicar shuffled his feet in embarrassment. Poirot's little grey cells, always restless, stirred. He murmured softly to himself, "Mon Dieu, a bride who does not appear on the morning of her marriage. It is not the way of romance. No, no, it has the taste of something darker." 5 more minutes passed. The silence grew unbearable. At last the heavy oak doors at the rear of the church creaked open, not to admit the radiant figure of the bride, but rather a bridesmaid, her face pale, her breath short. She hurried down the aisle, whispering urgently into the ear of the best man. A ripple of alarm spread as her words carried to others nearby. She was there a moment ago, in the vestry, and now she is gone. Gasps escaped from several throats. The vicar raised a hand, attempting to calm the gathering, but the whispering swelled into a buzzing hive of voices. Lord Henry strode down the aisle, his boots striking hard upon the stones. He seized the bridesmaid by the arm. "Gone! What nonsense! Order here!" He turned to Lord Henry. "Your bride must have taken ill, or perhaps nerves overcame her. Let's not jump to wild conclusions." But Poirot, who had quietly approached, cleared his throat delicately. His voice, though soft, carried with calm authority. "Non, Monsieur l'Inspecteur, you are wrong. Lady Evelyn has not taken ill, nor has she fled in the cowardice of nerves. Regardez, s'il vous plaît. The clasp, it is broken, yes? That signifies force. A jewel torn from the neck, not removed in peace. She did not vanish, no. She was made to vanish." Crail frowned. "You mean abduction?" Poirot bowed his head slightly. "Precisely, mon ami. This is no elopement, no fainting fit. This is crime, most cruel, most deliberate. And Hercule Poirot tells you, the bride is not lost. She is hidden." The congregation gasped once more, the words striking like thunder. All eyes turned to Poirot, their murmurs rising. The detective, the famous Belgian, could it be true? Lord Henry's face twisted with rage and fear. Hidden? By whom? For what purpose? Poirot only smiled, his moustache gleaming. "Ah, milord, that is what we shall discover. But be certain of one thing. Until Lady Evelyn is found, no one in this church is free of suspicion." The drama of the vanished bride had transformed what was to be a celebration into a nightmare. Guests clutched at one another, whispering. Servants were dispatched to search every corridor of the church, every carriage outside, every corner of the square. Yet the bride was nowhere to be found. Poirot, unmoved by the panic, walked with deliberate steps to the vestry, where Evelyn had last been seen. The room was modest, furnished with a long mirror, a small table strewn with pins and ribbon, and a gilt chair, upon which lay the abandoned bridal bouquet. The flowers were crushed, petals scattered as if by hurried movement. The veil was gone, and there upon the floor, Poirot's sharp gaze caught the faintest trace, a smear of mud, dark against the polished stone, leading toward the garden door. He bent low, touching the stain with his gloved finger. Fresh, about to wed. Always there are those who would prevent it. The pieces began to move upon his mental chessboard. Lord Henry Marchmont, with his rigid pride and concealed temper. Clara Whitcomb, Evelyn's cousin, known for her envy. Dr. Basil Harwood, the family physician, curiously insistent upon attending. Edgar Rowley, a rejected suitor whose devotion had turned sour. And perhaps others still, hidden in the wings of this drama. Poirot stroked his mustache with satisfaction. The mystery had begun. He returned to the nave, his voice calm but commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs, do not fear. Lady Evelyn is not lost to us forever. The criminal believes himself clever, but he is not reckoned with Hercule Poirot. I give you my solemn word. Before the night falls, the truth shall be revealed." The congregation, awed and unsettled, fell silent. The organist's hands rested once more upon the keys, but he dared not play. The wedding had transformed into something darker, something unforgettable. And Poirot, with a gleam in his eyes, thought only of the game that lay ahead. "This is not the end of a marriage," he whispered to himself. "It is the beginning of a most curious crime." Chapter 2. The Suspects Gathered. The storm had gathered with uncanny swiftness, rolling in from the west as if summoned by the turmoil inside St. Margaret's. Rain splattered against the tall Gothic windows, muting the stained glass into murky colors. A gloom settled upon the church interior, made all the darker by the absence of the radiant bride. What had begun as a celebration was now steeped in fear. Hercule Poirot, that small, immaculately dressed figure with his shining shoes and his luxuriant mustache, stood at the altar steps and surveyed the crowd, His presence, though physically unimposing, drew every eye. He held his gloved hands together as though in prayer, but his eyes darted with precise calculation, missing nothing. "Messieurs et mesdames," he began, his voice carrying calm authority. "You are troubled, naturellement. A wedding without a bride, say inconceivable. Yet we must not lose our heads. Lady Evelyn is not vanished into thin air. She is near. Someone here, among us, knows why she has not muttered, but did not object. He knew, as did most present, that Poirot's name carried weight. The guests, still restless, were ushered from the pews into the great hall adjoining the church. It was a reception space of polished oak, portraits of bishops glowering from the panelled walls. The chandeliers cast golden light upon faces pale with shock. Servants bustled with trays of untouched champagne, their hands trembling. The merriment intended for a wedding feast was curdled into grim vigil. Poirot moved through them like a general marshalling his troops. One by one, he began to draw out those closest to the vanished bride, assembling the tableau of suspects in his mind. Lord Henry Marchmont was first. The groom sat stiff-backed upon a chair, his knuckles drumming the armrest. His eyes, dark and fevered, darted from face to face, as though each were a potential conspirator. Poirot approached gently. "Milord, you are distraught, naturellement. Yet I must beg of you, control your nerves. To lose one's bride, it is tragic. But to lose also one's head, that is fatal." Henry snapped. "Are you suggesting I had anything to do with this outrage? Preposterous. Evelyn was to be my wife. I loved her." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Ah, love. It is a word most flexible, is it not? One may love deeply, possessively, even destructively. Forgive me, I must ask. Did Lady Evelyn ever express doubts about your union?" Henry's eyes narrowed. "Never. We were perfectly matched. Society expected it, and she knew her duty." Poirot filed the words away. Society expected it. She knew her duty. Curious phrases for a man professing love. Next came Clara Whitcomb, cousin to Lady Evelyn. Clara was a tall young woman of striking, if somewhat sharp, features. She wore a gown of jade green, which now seemed garish against her pallor. Her fingers twisted a lace handkerchief as she sobbed dramatically. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, this is dreadful. My poor cousin, gone without a trace. Who could have done such a thing? Why, she had no enemies." Poirot bowed politely. "No enemies. Doctor, you honor the family with your presence. But tell me, why is the physician required at a wedding? There is no malady to treat, save perhaps of the heart." Harwood stammered. I have long been a friend of the Marchmonts. Lady Evelyn confided in me often. She was delicate of constitution. I thought it prudent to remain nearby." Poirot raised a brow. "Delicate? And yet all accounts speak of her as vigorous, healthy, full of life." The doctor's hand trembled as he relit his pipe. "Women may be strong in appearance, Monsieur Poirot, yet fragile within. You cannot know the anxieties she suffered." Poirot's little grey cells stirred. A physician who insisted upon Evelyn's frailty when she was in truth robust. This too was curious. Finally, there was Edgar Rowley, once Evelyn's suitor. He was a pale, brooding man in his late 20s, with dark hair falling untidily across his brow. His gaze was intense, his mouth set in bitterness. Poirot addressed him delicately. "Monsieur Rowley, I hear that once you hoped to wed Lady Evelyn. Is this true?" Edgar's lips curled. "I loved her, truly loved her, not as Henry did with his cold ambition, but she cast me aside. Said she must marry for her family's sake, not her heart's." His voice trembled with suppressed anger. "And now she is gone." Poirot tilted his head. "Your grief, it is sincere, yes, Yet also there is resentment. Such emotions may twist a man, make him desperate. Edgar's eyes blazed. You think I would harm her? Never. I would die for her. He turned away, fists clenched. Poirot observed calmly, storing every reaction, every word. By the time the questioning ended, the rain outside had thickened into a deluge. The windows rattled with each gust of wind. The guests murmured, trapped in their own fear and speculation. The church, once a place of sacred joy, now felt like a prison. Poirot drew Inspector Creole aside. We have, mon ami, 4 figures of interest. The groom, proud and controlling. The cousin, envious. The physician, over-attentive. The rejected lover, bitter. Each they have a motive, however—
Mesdames et messieurs, we begin our true investigation. For the bride is somewhere close, and one among you knows why. The thunder outside cracked, rattling the windows as though to punctuate his words. The mystery had tightened its grip, and Poirot, with his little grey cells whirring, knew the game had only just begun. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Halls. The rain had not relented. It came in sheets, pounding the high windows of Marchmont Manor with a fury that seemed to mirror the unease within. Servants hurried through dimly lit corridors with trembling candlesticks, their shadows leaping grotesquely across the panelled walls. The storm had trapped them all. Family, guests, suspects. What was meant to be a house of celebration had become a fortress of suspicion. Poirot, ever immaculate, walked the length of the main corridor with measured tread, his patent leather shoes clicking softly against the marble tiles. His small, rotund figure seemed oddly at ease within the gloom, as though darkness itself bent to accommodate him. In his hand he twirled the scrap of veil discovered in the garden, its torn edge and the faint trace of blood providing both clue and accusation. Inspector Creole followed behind, his heavy boots clattering, his face thunderous. "This is a cursed business," he muttered. "A young lady vanishes and you prance about like a cat sniffing cream. If you ask me, she took fright and bolted. Happens more often than you'd think." Poirot halted, turning on his heel. His green eyes glittered. "Non, mon ami." The bouquet abandoned, the clasp torn, the veil bloodied, these are not the signs of a runaway bride. They are the signature of violence. Mark me well. The Lady Evelyn did not leave by her own wish. She was removed. Creole grunted, unconvinced, but said no more. He knew that the little Belgian's record in such matters was unassailable. Poirot paused at a large arched window. Beyond the rain-lashed glass, the gardens stretched into darkness, their rose beds and hedges rendered ghostly beneath the flickering stormlight. Somewhere out there the struggle had taken place. Somewhere, perhaps, whispers reached him, snatches of conversation, hurried, hushed, betraying more than their speakers intended. From behind a half-closed door he heard a woman's voice, Clara Whitcomb, sharp with frustration. "Why should I be treated as though I were the guilty one? Evelyn always had everything. It was never enough for her, never. Do you think she would have stopped once she had Henry as well?" Poirot's mustache quivered. He leaned closer, careful to remain unseen. A man's voice answered, low and urgent. It was Edgar Rowley. "Clara, lower your voice. They'll hear you. You forget yourself. This is not the time." "Not the time?" Clara hissed. "When else? She is gone, Edgar, gone, and do you not see what that means for us?" Rowley's reply came tight with emotion. "It means she is in danger. God help us if she is dead." His voice cracked. Poirot retreated softly into the corridor, his mind ticking. So, Clara's jealousy was real, and Edgar's devotion lingered still, raw and desperate. Two motives entwined like ivy on a wall. Yet there was something strange in Clara's words. What that means for us. A curious plural. Poirot moved on, his step noiseless upon the carpeted floor. Near the library he paused again, for the door stood ajar and the scent of tobacco drifted out. Inside, Dr. Basil Harwood sat in a high-backed chair, his face bathed in firelight. His pipe glowed red, then dimmed as he puffed, his brow furrowed in thought. Delicate of constitution, Poirot recalled softly. Yes, that is what he said. He pushed the door open gently. Bonsoir, docteur. You enjoy solitude while others grieve? Harwood started, nearly dropping his pipe. Poirot, you startled me. I needed quiet. The storm unsettles me. Poirot's eyes lingered upon the shelves of medical texts lining the walls. Or perhaps it is the conscience that unsettles, huh? Tell me, doctor, what is this malady from which Lady Evelyn suffered, that required you, her physician, to be present at her wedding? The doctor stammered. Anxieties, nerves, nothing specific. Smear. The soil was the same rich loam he had found upon the torn veil, and yet these prints were too small for Lord Henry, too delicate for Inspector Creel's heavy boots. Poirot measured with his eye. They were the steps of a woman. He straightened, his eyes glittering. A woman, then, had ventured into the garden after Evelyn vanished, or perhaps with Evelyn herself. The chain of suspicion tightened. Later in the drawing room, Poirot found the household gathered. The atmosphere was tense. Voices hushed, eyes darting. Lord Henry stood apart, stiff as a statue, refusing conversation. Clara sat upon a sofa, dabbing theatrically at her eyes, though they gleamed with sharp intelligence. Edgar Rowley paced like a caged beast, while Dr. Harwood refilled his pipe with trembling hands. Poirot entered with quiet dignity. Mes amis, forgive my intrusion, but I must ask, which of you ventured into the garden after Lady Evelyn disappeared? The soil, it tells tales, you see. Even the storm cannot wash away such traces. A silence fell. No one spoke. Poirot's moustache twitched. No one? That is most curious, for the soil has spoken to Hercule Poirot, and soil, mesdames et messieurs, does not lie. At that moment, a servant entered, her eyes wide. Monsieur Poirot, sir, forgive me, but I saw her. I swear it, I saw Lady Evelyn. The room erupted with gasps. Lord Henry strode forward. Where? Tell us. The maid wrung her hands. It was near the east wing, sir, not an hour past. I glimpsed her veil. She was hurrying through the corridor. I called, but she vanished into the shadows. Clara shrieked, half in relief, half in fear. Edgar blanched. The doctor dropped his pipe. Lord Henry's face drained of blood. Poirot merely inclined his head. Ah, how interesting. The east wing, long unused, long silent, and now it shelters whispers and shadows. Très bien. Tomorrow we shall see what secret. Mon ami, a discovery most intriguing. Creil halted mid-stride. What's that, then? Poirot tapped the envelope. A ticket, one that should not exist, and yet does. Last night, in the pocket of a discarded cloak near the servants' corridor, I found it. A railway carriage ticket, issued yesterday. Destination, London. Creil frowned. London? You mean someone here planned to leave? That could mean Evelyn after all. Poirot raised a finger. Non. Consider the detail, mon cher. The ticket is stamped for the 10 o'clock train. At that hour, Lady Evelyn should have been walking to the altar. And further, her disappearance occurred before she ever left the manor. No, this ticket speaks not of her flight, but of another's plan. Someone prepared for escape. Someone who thought ahead. The inspector scowled. So one of them meant to run. But which? And why? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Ah, that is what we must learn. The little grey cells, they demand order. Already they whisper that the hand which purchased this ticket is the same hand that tore a veil, spilled a drop of blood, and sought to vanish amid the storm. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. We must ask discreetly. The guilty one will betray themselves, not in what they say, but in how they say it. The household gathered again in the drawing-room at mid-morning. Heavy drapes were pulled back to let in a reluctant light, though the atmosphere remained oppressive. Faces were pale, voices subdued. No one had slept well. Lord Henry stood apart, his jaw clenched. Clara Whitcomb occupied a chair with her usual theatrical size, while Edgar Rowley leaned against the mantelpiece, eyes hollow. Dr. Harwood busied himself polishing his spectacles, his hands trembling slightly. Poirot entered with impeccable grace, the inspector close behind. He bowed lightly. Mes amis, forgive the intrusion once more, but it is necessary. A small matter has come to light, a most curious item. He produced the ticket between two gloved fingers. Its paper was slightly crumpled, its print still sharp. Yesterday morning, Poirot said softly, someone purchased this, a railway carriage ticket to London. One way. Does not come from choice. It is inflicted. Dr. Harwood cleared his throat nervously. Then perhaps one of the servants. It would be unwise to assume guilt lies only among us. Poirot's eyes glittered. Indeed, Doctor, you speak swiftly to move suspicion elsewhere. And yet, what servant would conceal such a ticket in the cloak of a guest? Harwood flushed crimson. Lord Henry broke in with sudden anger. Enough of this. My bride is missing, my household in chaos, and you waste time with scraps of paper. Find Evelyn, sir, or confess that you cannot. Poirot regarded him calmly. Patience, milord. To rush is to stumble. The truth comes step by step. Even now, we draw closer. Later, Poirot strolled through the long gallery once more. Crail trudged beside him, muttering, I don't like this business with the ticket. Could be a trick. Could have been planted to mislead you. Poirot smiled faintly. Perhaps. But even a trick reveals the trickster. If planted, by whom? And for whose eyes? Non, mon ami. The ticket is genuine. The question is, was it meant for use or for deception? They paused at the tall casement window where Poirot had found the soil the night before. The trail remained faintly visible, despite attempts to clean it. Poirot bent again, studying it afresh. Soil, fabric, blood, ticket, he murmured. Always the small things, Crail. They weave the tapestry of truth. The inspector snorted. Tapestry or no, I'll wager it leads to Rowley. He's shifty, that one. Could have planned to whisk her away, old flame and all. Poirot's mustache twitched. Perhaps. Yet he is careless in his passion. This is the work of calculation. And I wonder, mon ami, if passion and calculation live in the same heart. By afternoon, Poirot turned his attention to the east wing. Its corridors, long disused, smelled of dust and damp plaster. The windows were shuttered, the floors thick with neglect. Servants avoided it, whispering of drafts and echoes. Poirot carried a lantern, its glow spilling over faded wallpaper and cracked wainscoting. Crail followed reluctantly, muttering about rats. Halfway down a corridor, Poirot answered. That evening, the household dined together under Poirot's watchful gaze. The great hall, once intended for celebration, was now a theatre of suspicion. Candles flickered upon strained faces. Conversation faltered. Poirot ate sparingly, sipping wine, while his eyes studied every gesture. Clara toyed with her food, feigning disinterest, yet watching Edgar's every move. Edgar scarcely ate at all, his hands trembling. Harwood avoided Poirot's eyes, his pipe set aside, untouched. Lord Henry drank deeply, his face grim. At length, Poirot set down his glass. His voice carried clearly through the hall. Mes amis, one among you holds the key to this mystery. The veil, the soil, the blood, the ticket, all are threads in a single design. I promise you this, Hercule Poirot shall unravel it, and when he does, the guilty will have nowhere left to hide. A silence fell, heavy and suffocating. In that silence, Clara's fork clattered against her plate. Edgar dropped his napkin with a start. Harwood wiped his brow with shaking hands. Lord Henry glared into his wine. Poirot's eyes swept them all, glittering like steel. The truth, mesdames et messieurs, is already close. Very close. Later, alone in his chamber, Poirot laid out the clues upon his desk. The torn veil, the soil-stained scrap, the railway ticket, the fragment of letter. He arranged them with fastidious care, as though each were a chess piece. Which of you, he murmured, betrays the hand that moves? The ticket points outward, to flight. The veil points inward, to struggle. The letter speaks of trust and fear. Put together, they whisper of a design most deliberate. He folded his hands, closing his eyes. Tomorrow, we look deeper into the East Wing. There, I think, the walls themselves will speak, and when they do, Hercule Poirot will listen. Outside, the wind rose again, rattling the windows like skeletal fingers. Somewhere in the vast silence of the manor, a floorboard creaked, as though beneath an unseen tread. Poirot opened his eyes, moustache twitching. Yes, he whispered, the house still keeps. Chapter 5. Secrets of the East Wing. The following morning dawned grey and reluctant, as though even the sun hesitated to look upon Marchmont Manor. A heavy mist lay over the grounds, clinging to the hedges and lawns, rendering the house a blurred silhouette against the pale sky. Inside, the air was hushed. Servants moved quietly, their footsteps softened, their voices hushed to whispers. Hercule Poirot, however, was in excellent spirits. He had dressed with meticulous care, his grey suit immaculate, his mustache waxed to perfection, his patent leather shoes polished to a shine. From his window he had watched the mist curl over the sodden gardens, and he had smiled. Nature herself, he murmured, she hides what she wishes, but always, toujours, she reveals in time. At the appointed hour, he met Inspector Crail in the great hall. The inspector looked as though he had slept little, his eyes red-rimmed, his jaw rough with stubble. He carried a lantern in one hand and a revolver in the other. I don't like this business, Crail muttered. The East Wing hasn't been opened in years. Rats, mold, rotting boards. No good can come of it. Poirot inclined his head with serenity. Ah, but perhaps much good, mon ami, for it is there, I think, that Marchmont Manor conceals her most precious secrets. Together they crossed into the East Wing. The great oak door groaned upon its hinges as it opened, releasing a waft of stale air tinged with mildew. Beyond lay a corridor of shadow, its walls stained with damp, its carpet worn and moth-eaten. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and dust lay thick upon every surface. Poirot lifted his lantern, its glow casting long, flickering shadows. Voila, he said softly, the theater of the whispers. They moved slowly down the corridor. The air was cool and heavy, the silence broken only by the creak of floorboards beneath their feet. At intervals hung portraits of forgotten ancestors, their faces dulled by grime, their eyes seeming to follow intruders with mute reproach. Poirot paused before one such portrait, a severe woman in Elizabethan ruff and pearls. Observe, mon ami, even in decay, wore such ornaments, did she not? Creel's eyes widened. Then she was here, brought, or she came of her own accord. Brought, Poirot corrected gently, for a bride does not wander dusty corridors in her wedding finery. He wrapped the hairpin carefully, pocketing it. Further along they discovered another room, once a music chamber. The piano stood mute, its keys yellowed, strings broken. Dust lay heavy across it, yet Poirot bent low, studying the surface with intense concentration. He traced a line with his gloved finger, revealing a streak where dust had been disturbed. "Regardez," he whispered. "Someone leaned here not long ago. See, the pattern of a hand." Creel crouched beside him. Small hand, a woman's. Poirot nodded gravely. Evelyn, she was here, oui, perhaps held, perhaps in flight, but here. His eyes travelled to the far wall, where a tapestry hung limp, its colours faded. A strange draught fluttered its edge. Poirot moved to it, lifting the fabric. Behind lay a narrow wooden door, its frame warped with damp. "Ah," Poirot exclaimed softly, "a door concealed, and where there is a hidden door." Creel shouldered past him, forcing it open with a grunt. The wood groaned, the hinges shrieked. Beyond lay a narrow stairwell, spiralling downward into darkness. The inspector raised his lantern, the light barely penetrating the gloom. "A passage," he said. "God knows where it leads." Poirot's moustache quivered with satisfaction. "To knowledge, mon ami. Let us descend." The stair was steep, the air damp and cold. Their footsteps echoed hollowly as they descended. At the bottom they found a narrow corridor, stone-walled, arched low, running beneath the manor. "This," Poirot whispered, "is older than the East Wing itself. A relic, perhaps, of days when houses hid priest or prisoner. Such passages are built for concealment." They followed it, their lantern casting eerie shadows. Twice the corridor branched, once to a bricked-up doorway, once to a collapsed arch, where rubble blocked the way. At last it ended at another wooden door, iron-banded. It found themselves in a disused outbuilding near the stables. The morning mist still hung heavy, cloaking the grounds. The tracks ended in churned earth, indistinct from the storm's ravages. Creel cursed. "Damn it all! The trail's gone. She could be anywhere." Poirot stood very still, his eyes half closed. "Not anywhere, mon ami. The guilty one is still among us. Why hide her within the manor, only to spirit her away? No, no. She is near. The East Wing is but one chamber of this riddle. Another waits." He pocketed the slipper, turning back toward the house. "Come, we shall not tell them what we found, not yet. To reveal too soon is to warn the fox before the hounds are ready." Creel frowned but obeyed. That evening, Poirot summoned the household once more to the drawing-room. His expression was grave, his manner controlled. "Mes amis," he said, "today Hercule Poirot walked the East Wing. There, I found proof that Lady Evelyn was taken. Proof that she lived, if only for a time, within those walls." Clara gasped, her hand to her throat. Edgar's face drained of colour. Harwood fumbled for his pipe with shaking fingers. Lord Henry clenched his fists upon the mantelpiece, his knuckles white. Poirot continued. "A hairpin, a handprint, a hidden passage, and a slipper, her slipper." Cries of horror filled the room. Clara wept noisily. Edgar buried his face in his hands. Poirot raised a finger. Yet mark me well. These are not tokens of death, but of concealment. Lady Evelyn was hidden, not slain. Therefore, she may yet live. The room stirred with renewed tension. Poirot's gaze swept across them. Who among you knew of the East Wing's secrets? Who among you walked those dust-choked halls, carried her through the darkness, and thought to keep Hercule Poirot deceived? I tell you, your time grows short. Already, the truth presses at your door. He bowed slightly, then withdrew, leaving silence in his wake.
Brow, attended by an overzealous maid. The guests, once merry, had grown restless, whispering in little knots like parishioners after a scandalous sermon. And at the center of it all stood Hercule Poirot, immaculate despite the hour, his mustaches gleaming in the candlelight like two precise strokes of a master calligrapher. He surveyed the gathering with eyes that missed nothing. "Mesdames et messieurs," he announced at last, his voice carrying like a conductor's baton, silencing an unruly orchestra. "I must ask for a moment of patience. This affair of the vanished bride, it is grave, très grave, but already there are threads of order among the chaos. Allow me to disentangle them." The eyes of the room turned toward him, some with relief, others with suspicion. Inspector Sharp, meanwhile, stood at Poirot's elbow, his arms folded in a mixture of irritation and grudging respect. "You've got the floor, Poirot," he muttered, "though if you'd prefer to share your deductions privately, Scotland Yard might save itself some trouble." "No, no, mon ami," Poirot said gently. "This is a crime committed not in the shadows of Soho or Whitechapel, but in the midst of family and friends. Secrets here are like the heavy curtains of this house. They obscure, they suffocate. I prefer to let in a little air." The principal figures were discreetly assembled in the library. Poirot insisted upon a smaller, more intimate setting. Somewhere the rustle of a sleeve or the flicker of an eyelash could not go unnoticed. There sat Cecilia Wren, the cousin, pale and brittle as a porcelain figurine, her eyes darting toward every question like a bird startled from its perch. Lord Henry Whitcomb, tall, elegant, yet brooding, his expression that of a man deeply wronged, or concealing some dangerous truth. Dr. Lucius Markham, the family physician, rotund and florid, fingers tapping incessantly against his cane as though it were an extra heartbeat. Mrs. Helena Radcliffe, the bride's companion, fanning herself with a mixture of indignation and feigned frailty. And lastly, hovering uncertainly near the door, Thomas Briggs, the butler, whose weathered face betrayed decades of reconciliation. Her lips trembled. "If you must know, I thought her reckless. She scarcely knew Lord Henry. And," she faltered, "she knew how I felt." "How you felt, mademoiselle?" Poirot pressed. The cousin flushed scarlet. "I was fond of him, more than fond. But he never looked my way. And then Sophia. She always had to have the finest dresses, the finest jewels, and now the finest husband." The room shifted uneasily. Lord Henry's gaze dropped to the carpet. Poirot let the silence linger like a blade before turning. "And you, my lord, were you aware of this devotion?" Henry Whitcomb lifted his chin, his voice cool. "I was not. And even if I had been, my choice was clear. Sophia was unlike anyone else. Her spirit, her defiance. Yes, she challenged me, but I admired her for it." Poirot observed him closely. "And yet admiration, it can sometimes turn to resentment when it is thwarted, n'est-ce pas? Did Sophia also challenge you, my lord, in ways less pleasant?" Henry's jaw tightened. She was strong-willed, but no man of sense desires a meek bride. I loved her. The word lingered, but it had not the warmth of confession. It was cold, as though rehearsed. Poirot shifted to Dr. Markham. You, Monsieur le Docteur, you were summoned to the bride earlier this evening? The doctor puffed, adjusting his waistcoat. Yes, Lady Sophia complained of a faint spell just before the ceremony. Nerves, I told her, nothing more. Did she mention to you any fear, any anxiety beyond the ordinary? She was pale, agitated. I prescribed a small tonic. She drank it, and within 10 minutes declared herself quite recovered. Poirot's eyebrow twitched. And this tonic, it was of your own preparation? Of course, a simple compound, laudanum and a few herbs. Poirot exchanged a glance with Inspector Sharp. Laudanum, in delicate hands, could soothe or silence. Madame Radcliffe, Poirot continued, as companion to the bride, you were privy to her thoughts. Did she gravelly, uneasy? I fetched the jewel case, sir, at Lady Sophia's request. She wished to place the sapphire upon her gown before she entered the hall, but when I brought it, she seemed frightened. She asked me to leave it on the table. That was the last I saw of her. Did you notice if the case was locked? Aye, sir. Snapped shut. But she had the key on her chain. Poirot's little grey cells thrilled with the spark of order. The case, the key, the fear, the fainting spell, it was a pattern. A pattern faint as embroidery on pale silk, but there. When at last the suspects were dismissed, Inspector Sharp leaned against the mantel, exhaling. They're all hiding something, each one as slippery as an eel. Poirot smiled faintly. Just so, mon ami. But you see, it is not the lies that interest me. It is the manner in which they lie. Cecilia's jealousy, it is open, raw. But jealousy is not enough to vanish a bride. Lord Henry, he speaks of love as though it were duty. Is it possible he loved the possession more than the woman? The doctor, that one is interesting. A man who mixes laudanum as though it were lemonade. And Madame Radcliffe, who dismisses superstition, yet repeats it with relish. Enfin, there is the butler, who speaks the truth but trembles as though concealing a shadow upon his soul. Sharp rubbed his temples. You've a knack for making the straightforward look like a blasted labyrinth. Poirot's moustache twitched. Mais non, Inspector. It is already a labyrinth. I merely hold the lantern. It was near midnight when Poirot requested another word with Lady Blackwood. He found her alone in her private sitting room, still pale but alert now, her eyes sharpened by fear. Madame, he began softly, you are a mother. You know your daughter better than any. Tell me, was she truly happy in this marriage? Lady Blackwood hesitated, then clasped her hands. No, not entirely. She adored the grandeur of it, the title, the life at Whitcomb Hall, but she confided to me doubts. She feared Lord Henry's temper himself. But Hercule Poirot suspects everything. And with that, he turned back into the shadows, already weaving the whispers into the tapestry of his growing theory. Chapter 7. The Labyrinth of Lies. The corridors of Blackwood Manor seemed longer at night, their silence heavy, as if the walls themselves were straining to hear the secrets whispered within them. Poirot, after overhearing the furtive conversation on the landing, retired not to his chamber, but to a solitary vigil in the library. The fire had dwindled to embers, and in their glow he sat, motionless, save for the rhythmic tapping of his fingers upon the armrest. He thought of the bride, Lady Sophia,
whose laughter must have once filled these rooms like sunlight. Now she was gone, vanished as though swallowed by the house itself. To Poirot, such vanishings were never magic. Always there was method, and tonight, he resolved, he would begin to trace it with precision. The clock struck 1. Poirot rose, smoothing his waistcoat, and summoned Inspector Sharp. The weary policeman, hair rumpled, entered with a grunt. "You do not sleep, mon ami?" Poirot asked lightly. "Not with a missing bride under my nose," Sharp growled. "Any luck with your thinking?" Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Luck? No, Inspector, only logic. And logic. It tells me that the whispers we overheard are of great importance. But tell me, do you believe it was Lord Henry and the doctor?" Sharp frowned. "Sounded like them, but walls play tricks. Could have been anyone." "Just so," Poirot agreed. "But consider, why would they whisper unless there is something to conceal? We must not confront them yet, no. To rush is to ruin the symmetry of the design. Instead, we watch. We wait." Sharp scowled but said nothing. By morning the manor was abuzz once more. Servants carried trays with trembling hands, and the guests murmured in corridors, their voices laden with both fear and curiosity. Poirot observed it all with the serenity of a sapphire again. Always the sapphire. Later that day, Poirot insisted upon a thorough examination of Sophia's chambers. He, Inspector Sharp, and Thomas Briggs entered the grand suite where the bride had prepared herself. The room bore traces of hurried activity, the vanity crowded with brushes and powders, a discarded silk shawl draped upon the bed, and on the table, the jewel case. It lay open, empty, the velvet recess where the sapphire had rested, now a hollow shadow. Poirot bent over it, his fingers brushing the clasp. "Inspector, observe. The lock shows no sign of force. The key was used." Sharp frowned, "And she had it on her chain." "Just so. And yet the chain is gone. Therefore either she herself unlocked the case, or another, possessing the key, did so." "Another?" Sharp said sharply. "How would anyone else have her key?" Poirot smiled faintly. "That is the riddle, mon ami." He next examined the window. Though shut, the latch was faintly askew, as though handled recently. Poirot leaned closer. Upon the sill, he discovered the faintest trace of mud, tiny particles ground into the wood. "Aha!" he murmured. "Mud. And yet the gardens are well kept, the paths of gravel. Only by the pond is there such soil." Sharp leaned over his shoulder. "So someone came this way. Perhaps. Or perhaps Sophia herself leaned here in desperation. But the clue, it is suggestive." Poirot requested the staff be questioned. One by one they paraded through the room, each professing ignorance, until it came to Mary, the young maid who had attended Sophia. Mary curtsied nervously. "Beg pardon, sir, but I did see something strange." Poirot inclined his head. "Speak, mademoiselle. You will not be punished for honesty." The girl wrung her hands. "It was just before the ceremony. I went to fetch fresh water for Lady Sophia. When I returned, she was by the window, staring down toward the gardens. She looked so pale, like a ghost, and she said under her breath, 'It is waiting for me.' Then she turned, smiled, and told me to leave." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Waiting for her? What, exactly?" "I don't know, sir. Only those words." Poirot turned his sharp gaze upon him. "And yet you dismissed her fears? Perhaps too readily, my lord? Forgive me, but when a woman fears, a man must either protect or silence." Henry's eyes blazed. "You go too far, Monsieur Poirot." "Perhaps. Or perhaps not far enough, Poirot murmured. That evening Poirot retired early to his chamber. But he did not sleep. At midnight he slipped silently from his room, descending the staircase with the tread of a cat, for he had resolved to test a theory. The manor was hushed, but faint light glowed beneath the study door. Poirot paused, pressing his ear to the wood. Inside he heard the murmur of voices. "We must rid ourselves of it," one whispered. "If it is found, it will not be found," another hissed. Poirot's lips curved. Voices confirmed. Secrets deepened. He withdrew, careful not to be detected, and returned to his chamber. But his little grey cells burned with clarity. The sapphire was not gone. It was hidden. And those who conspired in darkness feared its discovery more than the bride's disappearance itself. The next morning, Poirot requested to see Lady Blackwood once more. "Madame," he said softly, "tell me, from whom did Sophia inherit the sapphire?" Her eyes darkened. "From her grandmother. It has been in the family for generations. Always it was said to bring misfortune. My mother-in-law warned me when I wore it at my own wedding, and when Sophia claimed it for hers, I begged her not to. And yet she insisted. Yes, she said it was hers by right, and that she would not be frightened by shadows." Poirot tapped a finger against his lips. Courage or pride? Perhaps both. But you see, madame, a jewel may be cursed by more than superstition. It may be cursed by greed. Poirot gathered all once more in the library that evening. The fire crackled, shadows danced. "My friends," he began, "the truth begins to unmask itself. Lady Sophia did not vanish by whim. She feared something, someone. She spoke of drowning, of being suffocated beneath water. And where do we find the trace of mud? Perhaps you will permit me to examine what lies in your pocket." And as the firelight flickered, all waited with bated breath for his reply. Chapter 8. The Sapphire's Shadow. A tense silence enveloped the library. The flames in the hearth snapped like whips, casting harsh light upon anxious faces. Cecilia Wren's accusation hung in the air, sharp as a pistol shot. All eyes fixed upon Lord Henry Whitcomb, who stood rigid, one hand gripping his cane, the other pressed protectively against the inner pocket of his coat. "Come, my lord," Poirot said softly, his voice cutting through the hush like the edge of a blade wrapped in velvet. "We are among friends, if indeed we may still call ourselves such. Allow me to relieve your pocket of its burden." Lord Henry's nostrils flared. "This is an outrage. You've no right." Inspector Sharp stepped forward, his tone brusque. "On the contrary, my lord, in the matter of a missing woman and missing jewel, I've every right. Hand it over. Every right. Hand it over." For a moment, Henry appeared ready to resist, his face darkening with fury. Then, with a sudden motion, he drew from his pocket a small velvet pouch tied with a golden cord. He tossed it upon the table with a clatter, as though it burned his fingers. "There," he barked, "a trinket, nothing more." Poirot's eyes gleamed. He untied the pouch with fastidious care and let its contents spill into his palm. The room gasped. There, glittering in the firelight, lay the sapphire of Blackwood. It was larger than a pigeon's egg, cut to dazzling perfection, its depths a swirl of blue that seemed almost to move, as though the jewel contained the sea itself. Poirot held it delicately between thumb and forefinger, turning it so the light danced upon the walls. Voila! The stone that haunts dreams, the stone that drowns brides. Cecilia clutched her throat. Lady Blackwood sank deeper into her chair, her face ashen. Inspector Sharp's voice thundered, "So you did take it, Henry. Where's your bride? What have you done with her?"
Henry's eyes blazed with indignation. I took nothing. Sophia entrusted it to me.
To calm her nerves, not harm her. To suggest otherwise is monstrous. Poirot's mustaches quivered. Monstrous, perhaps, yet Lady Sophia's hands trembled, her mind clouded. She was convinced the sapphire carried a curse. A mind thus weakened, mon cher docteur, is easily led astray. Mrs. Radcliffe gave a shrill laugh, brittle and hollow. Led astray! Sophia was fanciful, but she was no fool. She would never leave her own wedding. Poirot turned upon her suddenly, his eyes narrowing. Would she not, madam? Or did someone persuade her she must, persuade her that her very life was endangered by remaining? The companion paled, her fan trembling in her hand. The tension grew unbearable. Poirot set the sapphire upon the table, its glow unnatural in the dim library. Consider, my friends, he said, pacing. Each of you has a reason to wish Sophia silenced. Cecilia, out of jealousy. Lord Henry, perhaps out of wounded pride. The doctor, out of knowledge too dangerous to reveal. Madame Radcliffe, out of what? Devotion? Resentment? And yet there is another reason that binds you all, the sapphire itself. He paused, letting his words sink in. This stone is no mere ornament. It is wealth. It is power. And it is fear. Whoever possesses it controls not only fortune, but the legend that surrounds it. What better way to rid oneself of inconvenient truths than to vanish the bride who wore it? Sharp struck the table. Enough riddles, Poirot. Where is Lady Sophia? Poirot's gaze flickered to the window, where moonlight streamed upon the glass. His voice dropped to a murmur. I believe, Inspector, that the pond outside conceals more than lilies. The mud upon the sill tells me as much. The bride spoke always of drowning. Where else should we look but there? A collective shudder ran through the room. Cecilia burst into tears. Lady Blackwood moaned faintly. Lord Henry shot to his feet. This is madness! You drag my bride from the water like a common thief? She's alive, I tell you. Poirot's eyes glittered. Perhaps. And yet, my lord, if she is not, then we must ask who on her wedding night. Mon Dieu, Poirot whispered. So, it is true. Sharp bent over her. She's gone. But Poirot raised a finger. Wait. He pressed two fingers gently against her throat. For a long moment, silence. Then suddenly, a faint flutter beneath the skin. Poirot's eyes blazed. She lives. Cries of astonishment filled the air. Quickly, Doctor, Poirot commanded, his voice like steel. Your art is required now. Revive her. Dr. Markham fell to his knees, fumbling with his bag. He applied smelling salts, rubbed her wrists, pressed upon her chest. At last, Sophia's lips parted, and a tremor ran through her. A gasp escaped her lungs, followed by a choking sob. She breathes, cried Cecilia. Poirot's face remained grave. But the attempt upon her life is real. Someone sought to drown her, to end her beneath the very waters she feared. This was no accident. When Sophia was carried inside, swaddled in blankets and revived by the fire, Poirot remained close. Her eyes fluttered open, filled with terror. She seized his wrist with surprising strength. The sapphire, she whispered hoarsely. It wants me. It called to me. Poirot hushed her gently. Non, mademoiselle. The stone calls to no one. It is men, greedy and cruel, who use its legend. Tell me, who brought you to the water? Her gaze darted about the room, falling upon each face, her mother, Cecilia, Radcliffe, the doctor, and finally Lord Henry. She shivered violently, unable to speak. Poirot patted her hand. Courage. You need not say tonight. The truth, it will come. It always does. Later, when the guests had been dismissed, Poirot sat alone with Sharp. You see, Inspector, he said softly, the case is no longer of a vanished bride. It is of an attempted murder. And now the motive is clearer. Possession of the sapphire, control of the legend, and the silencing of Sophia, who knew too much. Sharp leaned forward. And your suspect? Were restless, darting to and fro like caged birds. Behind him, the crackle of the fire was interrupted by Inspector Sharp's heavy tread. Shall recover, the doctor says, but it was a near-run thing. Another 10 minutes in that pond, and Lady Sophia would have been a corpse. Poirot inclined his head, not taking his eyes from the mist. Life, mon ami, is sometimes suspended by the thinnest of threads. And yet, what interests me more is not that she was found, but why she was placed there at all. Sharp gave a snort. That much is plain. Somebody wanted her out of the way to get at that cursed stone. Ah! Poirot turned, raising one delicate finger. You think so? But then why not wait until the marriage was completed? As Lady Blackwood's heir, Lord Henry would have owned both bride and sapphire. The timing, mon cher, is everything. To vanish the bride on the very night of her wedding, that is drama, oui, but not logic. Unless, he tapped his temple, unless the drama itself was the purpose. Sharp frowned. You mean to frighten her? To break her mind instead of killing her outright? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Exactly so. To persuade her, perhaps, to flee, or to keep her too terrified to speak of what she knows. What she knows? Poirot gave a little shrug. Ah, but we must first learn what she suspects, and for that we shall lay a trap. By mid-morning, the household was summoned once again to the library. The guests, pale from a sleepless night, gathered in uneasy silence. Cecilia Wren avoided everyone's gaze, her eyes swollen from tears. Mrs. Radcliffe fanned herself incessantly, muttering of curses and omens. Dr. Markham lingered at the decanter, pouring a measure of brandy, though the hour was indecently early. And Lord Henry, tall and stormy, leaned against the mantel, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the floor. Poirot entered last, his gait unhurried, his expression benign. He bowed courteously to Lady Blackwood, who sat with her embroidery untouched, her face stiff with suppressed emotion. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot, cursed bride throwing herself to her watery doom. But no, it is too convenient. Someone arranged for her to be placed there, unconscious but alive, so that all would whisper of curse and suicide. Dr. Markham cleared his throat, red-faced. She had laudanum in her veins, you said. Then it was she herself who dosed too heavily. Poirot whirled upon him. Non, docteur. Laudanum does not walk a woman from her chamber, down 2 flights of stairs, and out into the gardens. No, she was carried, or led, by one who wished to stage her death. And it is there that we must ask, who had the means, the strength, and the knowledge? The doctor fell silent, clutching his glass. Poirot let the silence stretch, enjoying the tightening noose of suspense. Then, with a dramatic flourish, he produced from his pocket a small white glove, damp and mud-stained. This I discovered at the water's edge, a glove of Lady Sophia, oui, but upon it, a smear of laudanum tincture, and here, upon the thumb, the faint impression of another's grip, forcing a vial to her lips. A murmur swept the room. Poirot raised his voice. The glove tells us this. Lady Sophia was drugged. She did not take the laudanum willingly. Cecilia's eyes widened in horror. Drugged? Then who? Who would do such a thing? Poirot looked from one face to another, then fixed his gaze firmly on Mrs. Radcliffe. "You, madame." The companion shrieked, her fan clattering to the floor. "Me? You dare accuse me of harming Sophia? I have been her friend since childhood." Poirot advanced a step, his finger wagging. "Exactly so. Her friend, her confidant, her constant shadow. And yet, when the household searched, you were absent from the drawing room. You claimed to be in the chapel, praying for her safety. But the verger says no such figure entered that night." Mrs. Radcliffe's lips trembled. I must have been mistaken." "Ah, mais non. You were not praying. You were placing her in the pond." Poirot's voice grew sharper, his Belgian accent more pronounced. "For years you have been devoted to Lady Sophia. Yet bitterness festered within you. To be companion is not to be mistress of velvet." He drew another item from his pocket. "Match precisely the lining of the jewel case in your own room." Mrs. Radcliffe stared, her lips moving soundlessly. Sharp seized her arm. "So it was you all along." But Poirot lifted his hand. "Gently, Inspector. Our drama is not yet concluded." At that moment, a cry echoed from the staircase. All turned as Lady Sophia herself appeared, pale and trembling, supported by a maid. She wore a shawl, her hair unbound, but her eyes were fierce with new resolve. "Poirot is right," she whispered hoarsely. "Radcliffe drugged me. She told me the Sapphire's curse would claim me unless I left the hall. She pressed the vial to my lips. I remember her words, 'Better a sleep than a death.' Then, darkness." Mrs. Radcliffe sagged in Sharp's grip, her denial crumbling. "I only meant to frighten her, only to keep her silent. She would have ruined everything." Poirot's gaze was merciless. "No, madame. You meant to keep her forever silent. But fortune was not with you. The water revived her instead of claiming her. And thus, Hercule Poirot unmasks you." The confession broke like a storm. Radcliffe was taken away, protesting weakly. Sophia collapsed into a chair, her tears mingling with laughter of relief. Lady Blackwood embraced her, murmuring prayers of gratitude. But Poirot did not join the rejoicing. He stood apart, gazing once more at the sapphire upon the table. "Yet," he murmured, his mustaches twitching, "there is still something that does not sing in tune. Why was Lord Henry so eager to keep the jewel hidden? Why did the doctor quail at mention of laudanum? Why did Cecilia weep, not only for Sophia, but for herself? Non, mes amis, the curtain has lifted on one masquerade, but the play, it is not yet ended." Sharp, overhearing, frowned. "You mean Radcliffe wasn't acting alone?" Poirot's eyes sparkled. "Ah, mon cher, you read my thoughts precisely. She played her part, yes, but the true author of this drama has yet to be revealed. One more mask must slip before we see the murderer's face." And Wren, pale as parchment, her hands twisting in her lap. Dr. Markham, outwardly composed, but with sweat beading his brow. And Lady Sophia herself, wrapped in a shawl, still trembling from her ordeal, but with fire in her eyes. Inspector Sharp stood guard by the door, his heavy jaw set, while two constables lingered outside in the hall. Mrs. Radcliffe had been removed to the village jail, her shrill denials echoing even now in memory. But Poirot had declared she was only a piece upon the board, not the hand that moved the pieces. Today, he promised, the true hand would be revealed. Poirot entered last, as was his habit. Immaculate in morning coat and gleaming shoes, he bowed to the company, then placed a velvet pouch upon the great oak table. It sagged heavily. The sapphire lay within. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said softly, "the play draws to its final scene. Already one curtain has lifted, revealing Madame Radcliffe as the would-be silencer of Lady Sophia. But she was not alone. No,
She was the tool, not the master. There remains the deeper question. Who conceived this drama? Who sought to vanish the bride and possess the stone of ill fortune? A tense silence followed, all eyes fixed upon him. Poirot began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back, his voice measured. Consider first the stone itself, a jewel of ancient origin, surrounded by tales of death. To some, a bauble, to others, a curse, yet always it attracts greed. For years it lay in the Blackwood vaults, a prize too great for any but the family to touch. But at a wedding it was brought forth, its moment of peril had arrived. He stopped before the fire, fixing Lord Henry with his gaze. You spoke often of the curse, of the need to protect Sophia by locking away the sapphire, and yet you kept it close, displayed it even at the very moment of her vows. Why? Unless you feared another would lay claim to it, unless you desired it above all else. Henry stiffened, his eyes flashing. Are you accusing me, Poirot? She was to be my wife. Poirot lifted a hand. Patience. I accuse no one yet, but mark this beneath his gaze. Mademoiselle Wren, you loved Lady Sophia as a sister, did you not? And yet your grief was touched with envy. You spoke to me of freedom, of escape. For was it not you who dreaded this house, this life of shadows? Did you not dream of the world beyond? With Sophia gone, with suspicion falling upon Radcliffe, the path might have opened for you to inherit the fortune. Her lips trembled. I would never hurt her. She was all I had. Poirot's mustache quivered. Yes, mademoiselle, I believe you. You are weak, perhaps, but not wicked. Yet your tears concealed another truth. You were afraid, not for Sophia, but of what Sophia might reveal. For she confided in you her suspicion that the sapphires were false. Did she not? Cecilia's gasp was answer enough. She buried her face in her hands. Poirot resumed his pacing. So we come at last to the heart. The sapphires, some are real, some false. Who would have knowledge of such substitution? Who had access to the vault, the opportunity to exchange the stones? Not Radcliffe, not Cecilia, not even the good doctor. No, only one among you had both motive and access. He wheeled suddenly upon Lord Henry. You, Monseigneur! A stunned silence fell. Lord Henry straightened, his face dark with fury. You dare! How dare you speak so in my own house? Poirot's voice cut across his protest. It is the truth. You, who stood to inherit not only the Blackwood estate, but also Lady Sophia's dowry. You, who feared discovery of the false stones. For it was you, years ago, who sold the real sapphires to pay your debts, replacing them with imitations. You, who whispered of curses to keep them hidden, so no jeweler would dare examine them closely. But Sophia suspected, and she confided in Radcliffe. That is why she had to vanish. Radcliffe acted the fool, yes, but at your command. Henry's breath came ragged. Lies! Nothing but lies! Poirot's finger shot upward. No, monsieur. Proof. Last night when I searched your chamber, sapphire. It is nothing but greed, and greed, it destroys always. For a long moment, the library was silent, save for the ticking of the great clock. Then, Lady Sophia rose, pale but resolute. Henry, she said softly, you were to be my husband, and yet you betrayed not only me, but your family. You sold truth for lies. He looked at her, anguish etched in every line. Sophia, I loved you, believe me. But she shook her head.
Love built on deceit is no love at all. Inspector Sharp stepped forward. Lord Henry Blackwood, you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The constables entered, placing firm hands upon Henry's shoulders. He did not resist. His once proud figure sagged like a broken reed. As he was led away, the thunder of his boots echoed through the hall like a death knell. Later, when the household had dispersed, Poirot remained by the fire with Lady Sophia. She gazed at the sapphire, now restored to its pouch. "Is it truly cursed, monsieur?" she asked. Poirot smiled faintly. "No, mademoiselle. Jewels have no power save that which men give them. The curse is greed, the superstition, the fear. Destroy those, and the stone is but a glittering thing." She nodded slowly. "Then perhaps it is better it be destroyed." "Perhaps," Poirot murmured, "but it is not for me to say. What matters is that you are safe. The bride who vanished returns, stronger than before." Sophia reached for his hand, gratitude shining in her eyes. "You have given me back my life, Monsieur Poirot. How can I ever thank you?" He bowed, his mustaches twitching with satisfaction. "By living it fully, mademoiselle. That is thanks enough." As Poirot left Blackwood Hall that afternoon, the sun broke free at last, casting golden light upon the sodden lawns. The great house loomed behind him, scarred by scandal, yet somehow cleansed. He paused upon the gravel drive, his valise in hand, and looked back one final time. "The curse is ended," he said softly. Then,